What's up? This is Hoppe Hour. I am your host, Ryan Hoppe. And on the phone line, Chris Demm from the Two Guys Named Chris show is on Hoppe Hour with Ryan Hoppe. What's up, man?
Ryan, hi. How are you? It's good to be on your show. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. I'm really excited to have you on. So my mom's side of the family is from Winston-Salem, North Carolina. And I grew up going to Haynes Mall and going to Village Tavern. And whenever I began visiting the Triad area around 2000, my Nana's boyfriend would have the radio on, and he would always have you guys on. So I've been a fan for about 25 years.
Oh, man. You know what? That means a lot. I appreciate you saying that, because that was pretty early on in the days of our show. You know, Chris Kelly and I began doing the program in January of 1999. And we have, over the course, we've been lucky. The listeners were very good to us from the start. And we have now reached the point, I suppose, in our lives / careers where there are people who are like, yeah, I grew up listening to you in the backseat of my parents' car going to school, or like you in the backseat of your Nana's car going to the Village Tavern. It is incredibly humbling, and I don't ever get tired of hearing that. So thank you for saying that.
No problem, man. How did you get into radio?
It's a good question. I think, like a lot of people, certainly of my age group, you know, I grew up mostly in the 1970s and 80s, child of the 60s. Music was always a big part of our family's lives. My dad was into Hollywood musicals, and he loved talk radio. My mom was into vocalists, jazz, and they were both very, very patient when their sons discovered that they could control the car radio. Not every parent will let their parents do that, but music was always playing in our house. The radio was the soundtrack of our lives. And so I think, first it was music that drew me in. I wanted to be the guy who could be the voice on the radio playing the cool songs.
And what was your first big break in radio? Like, was there like an internship you had? How did you get into radio?
Not by accident. I went to a college where I did not finish, and I'll leave them out of this because they had nothing to do with it. It was my own fault. They asked me to leave, and I didn't come back, which was the right move looking back. But my first semester at this unnamed college in Virginia, I volunteered to work at the campus radio station. And back then, this was around the fall of 1980. And my obsession at that time was new wave music, Elvis Costello, The Clash, the Ramones, Talking Heads, reggae music. Bob Marley, was still alive and making incredible music. And I wanted to get on the campus radio station and, play my kind of music. Well, the powers that be, the management at the station said, we've got plenty of DJs. No one ever wants to do the newscast. Yeah. So they did a half-hour news program every weekday, and there were about way too many people doing this. Like each person, so I became a quote-unquote newscaster. We would just take copy from the old Associated Press, just 3-4 line stories, read them poorly, and then just kind of pass the microphone around the room. There were 10, 11, 12 people on each 30-minute show. So if you had 10 seconds of airtime, that was considered a win. But the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, 1980, the campus had cleared out, of course, because everybody had 4 or 5 days off. And I walked over to the radio station because they needed someone to do the 5 o'clock news program. And the only other person in the building that day was a man whom I had heard on my hometown radio station in Richmond, Virginia. He worked part-time on the rock station, XL 102, WRXL. And I'd heard him for years growing up listening. He went to college during the week and then commuted back to Richmond, our mutual hometown, and would do air shifts on the weekend. So I knew who he was, and I was in awe. And there were only 2 of us in the building. And, the station was going to sign off the air probably as soon as we were done. There was nobody else in there. And so the two of us had to do an entire 30-minute show. And I was terrified because I was working with someone who was literally on the rock radio station I grew up listening to. And at the end of the program, he turned to me and he said, "You're a damn good reader." And ever since then, that was the spark that kind of lit the flame. And ever since then, it's like, well, that's the one thing I'm good at, is being on the radio. And so, yeah, it was the Wednesday before Thanksgiving of 1980 that was the seminal, the watershed moment, if you will.
Now, what was the process of the beginning? How did two guys named Chris form?
That's a good question. We knew each other many years before we ever even got started on our program. He worked with a very powerful, opinionated, and talented host named Jack Murphy for a number of years. And I had worked with a fellow by the name of Brad Krantz on WKRR Rock 92 Greensboro. I worked with him for about 5 years. And Kelly and I both started at roughly the same time. We had the same job. We were the second microphone on a very powerful show. And our job was to kind of, serve the host. We knew where we stood in the pecking order of things. It was Brad's show on Rock 92, and it was Jack's show on 107.5. So the two of us initially did not get along because we looked at each other as competition, which of course we were. But over time, we kind of started hanging out and realized we liked a lot of the same things, the same movies, the same TV shows, of course, mainly Seinfeld at that time. And so we started hanging out and playing basketball because we were young and single and had no prospects whatsoever. We'd commiserate about how our bosses, our co-hosts, made our lives miserable with their insane demands and the crazy hours. And, a couple nights after basketball or after we played wiffle ball, we played everything. It was just kind of sad and fun at the same time. We would say, wouldn't it be kind of cool to do a show one day? Well, long story short, Rock 92 had a syndicated morning show on, John Boy and Billy, who did really well from 1996 to 1998. For whatever reason, the company that owned the John Boy and Billy show decided to pull them from our station and put them on what was at the time a Clear Channel station. They didn't want one of their own, because John Boy and Billy was owned by a Clear Channel. They were a Clear Channel property. And they didn't want their own show competing against their own station, so they decided to put them on their station, and which left Rock 92 without a morning show. So we sort of petitioned our boss, his name is Bruce Wheeler, and said, can you give us a shot? And amazingly enough, he did. And so we started on January 4th of 1999. And it was not easy. It was kind of ugly at first. I don't know if you ever heard some of those early shows, Ryan, but we stuck it out, and we got to help along the way, and somehow managed to survive.
That's crazy because, you hear about Opie and Anthony, and they hated each other, but they pretended like they were friends on air, and then that ended up kind of leading to the downfall of Opie and Anthony. So it's kind of a credit to you guys that you guys did not get along at first, but found a way to be mature and to get it done. Because it feels like in radio, there's a lot of shows over the years that broke up because of their egos, and there was so much more potential they had.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, it's Opie and Anthony is a terrific example. When they were good, they were great.
Yeah.
Without naming too many names, there are sadly other shows that had that similar vibe. But yeah, we have remained friends. We get together at the beach once a year. We go over and have go to Super Bowl parties. Kelly's got his own life now. He's got 2 teenage kids of his own. I've been married now for almost 24 years, but, we are still cool. Our goal has always been to, make the show first and not try to. I don't know how you even make it work if you get along if you don't get along.
Now,
credit to them, I guess, for being such good actors.
Yeah, so now my Nana had this cousin who used to drive me around, and she always she's probably like 43 now, and she always had Murphy in the Morning on, and I always really liked that show as well. What was your time like working with Murphy in the same building? What was he like as a guy off air?
He was the biggest personality in the room. Everywhere he went. I mean, and with good reason. I mean, he had worked in New York with Scott Shannon. I mean, a radio legend. He had worked in San Diego, which is, of course, a monster market. And he was a big idea guy. And when he said, I want to do such and such, the staff on the building, the sales team, the promo team, management, and engineering said, all right, we'll do it. If he wanted to do his show live on the road on a Friday morning, they made it happen. I'm sure he was challenging to work with, and my understanding is that back then, people weren't as confessional on the radio, but people had to be a little more real. And but off air, we went on a cruise once to the Bahamas, and it was fun. It was a blast to travel with Jack. Away, 1,000 miles away from radio and microphones.
Now, what are some of your favorite parts about living in the Triad area? Like I had like a fascinating part about visiting there because I'm from Chicago, and I would always ask my uncle. We would park in this neighborhood to the side of Greensboro, and I would take a picture of the skyline because like growing up before smartphones, I took pictures with a digital camera. So I've always had like a fascination with that area. So what are some of your favorite parts about living there?
It's not a big town by any means, but I have lived here for so many. I mean, I moved here in, 1989. I mean, I was working on the air 3 days a week back then, it kind of reminded me of my hometown of Richmond, but on a much smaller scale. The climate's decent. I have grown to become kind of a big fan of restaurants. There are a number of really good restaurants here. I found, a really nice little social network of people who knew me before I was even on the radio. Of course I was on the radio, but who just kind of knew me as Chris, the guy that, you can hang out with and whatever. The downtown, as you have mentioned, the skyline is kind of, it's not enormous, of course, compared to Chicago. Yeah. But the downtown has revitalized immensely over the time I've been here, and it's kind of been fun to see that.
Now, what do you think about the Radio Hall of Fame? Do you ever put any thought into you and Chris getting into it? Because there's some radio people that really care about it, and there's some that don't. So, where do you stand with it?
I hope this doesn't come off as a cliche. I don't think about it. I really don't. We have been recognized by the North Carolina Association of Broadcasters on a couple of occasions, which is wonderful. But it's we're kind of socially awkward. We don't really. We certainly don't campaign for any of these things. It's nice to be recognized, but the fact that our listeners have kept us on the air for, 26 years now is that's reward enough. I can't imagine the Hall of Fame would be calling us, frankly, because we just kind of go in and, our goal today was the same as it was 26 years ago, is just to go in and kind of have a conversation and filter the day's events through our personalities. And I don't know that that's even Hall of Fame worthy. So I'm not trying to poo-poo your question, but
no, you're good.
It's kind of a blindside, honestly, Ryan.
Now, did you ever want to go to a bigger city, or were you happy with Greensboro?
Oh, definitely. Because when I started in radio, really got into the business in about 1983. Back then, job openings were plentiful. Voice tracking did not exist. There was no such thing as the internet, of course. So radio stations needed enormous air staffs. They needed people on the weekends. They needed people to work midnight to 6. And I loved working the crazy hours. There's something about those hours that I've always enjoyed. I would work, midnight to 6 on Christmas Eve. I didn't care because I was on the radio. My goal when I started was, and I think a lot of people did too, was to work, 2 years in a market and then move up and then move up and move up. And, I in my heart of hearts, I had thought, hey, maybe someday I'll be good enough to work in a market like Charlotte or Denver or, dare I say it, Los Angeles, because, those were the dream markets for a young person in the 1980s. That's where everything happened. But no, we Kelly and I have been kind of happy here as things have evolved in the business with mergers and acquisitions. We're now on 7 or 8 stations across a number of states. So we're on in other markets, but we didn't have to uproot. Kelly's kids went to school locally, so that kind of made a difference to them. So I'm not sure if that even answers your question, Ryan.
No, but what was the biggest thing you guys had to change when you went from being local to national?
Obviously, talking about events like weather or snow, everybody goes to the grocery store, but, we would have to, or burger place or whatever. So we had to kind of make sure that we try to be a little more universal, say, hey, I was at the grocery store the other day, or I was at instead of saying the Food Lion, or I was at the mall, instead of saying I was at the Four Seasons Mall or something of that nature. It took a while. Every now and then, we still slip up. But I think that a lot of our listeners kind of get it, and maybe radio listeners all across the country do too, that, everybody's somewhere. And I don't know. We were kind of under the impression that if the show is at least entertaining or / interesting enough, it didn't matter that we threw in a local reference to where Kelly's kid went to college or where he went after he graduated from high school.
Now, did you guys ever get suspended, or were you guys ever given an FCC fine?
Oh, no. We were in the early days of radio, of our show in the 1990s, and probably for the first 6-7 years. We kind of prided ourselves on doing April Fool's jokes, which, I think Kelly and I both kind of grew up listening to radio hosts who would do radio pranks, and we would get. We've gotten a couple of letters from the Attorney General. We've gotten a couple of letters from banks, a couple letters from the Postmaster General, but no, never been officially suspended and never been fined.
That's good, because you guys are edgy, but you guys never go into like X-rated, territory.
Well, if you've been in the business, Chris Kelly I started late compared to him. He was a teenager. I think he was in high school when he started working in radio. I was much, much later personally. And I think, we know where the line is, and to us, sometimes that's part of the fun, part of the challenge is coming up to the line and dancing around it, but in a way where the language is not vulgar. You can make your points in other ways.
Now, how often when you're out and about do you get recognized?
Not as much as you might think. With social media, of course, things change. The show has a social media page. The radio station does. I do. Occasionally, the grocery store, people will say, "Hey, big fan of the show," and I love it at restaurants when the chef recognizes me or something like that, or the bartender, or the host sometimes sometimes it's nice to get a table. You don't have to wait quite as long as somebody else for a table. Maybe once a month, but most, for the most part, people are very, very cool about it.
Was there ever kind of a weird person you met, or has everybody been pretty good?
Honestly, I guess I've been lucky. Most people, they kind of say, "Hey, look, I enjoy your show," and they seem to have been respectful of our boundaries. Not to say it doesn't happen. And I think for women in our business, it's 1,000% different. They get harassed at a whole different level than a man would.
Now, how did you guys end up getting Biggie on the show?
We had a number of phone screeners / producers, maybe 3-4 years in. For the first couple of years, it was just Kelly and myself. And his memory's better than mine about the years. But we eventually decided we needed a phone screener who was not on the air. And we went through 1, 2, 3, 4, and a woman named Deidre James, who she began as our phone screener, but she was incredibly funny, incredibly entertaining. So we moved her out of the quote-unquote producer's room, and we needed a phone screener. And Biggie had been making prank phone calls for the Jack Murphy show, and he kind of said, "Hey, I'd be interested in working in your show." And instantly, we knew this guy was funny at a level that we could certainly use, because Biggie's he worked for Pepsi or Coca-Cola. He's worked for Papa John's, and he'd done stand-up comedy, and you could just tell his quick takes, his one-liners were spectacular. And we said we need to make this guy a bigger part of the show. So his role just kept growing.
Now, how often do you communicate with everyone on your show?
It depends. I mean, every morning kind of begins the same way with just kind of a brief, what's happening in the news, what kind of audio do we need to capture. But there we have multiple text chains with everybody on the show. That's sometimes just nonsense, just gossip about coworkers, sporting events, political events, weather. So I would say daily.
Now, before I let you go, Chris, when it's all said and done, how do you want people to remember your morning show? Oh
man, that's a great question, and it's hopefully that they that they went out on their own terms. Unfortunately, not a lot of radio personalities can say that. So many people in broadcast period, they never know it's their last show. That would be nice. Hopefully they were never too heavy, and they were funnier than the other shows up and down the dial, and maybe it's a little bit smarter than the other folks up and down the dial.
Now, before I let you go, could I get you to just record a quick liner for my show?
Yeah, of course.
Say, hey, this is Chris Demm from Two Guys Named Chris, and you're listening to Hoppe Hour with Ryan Hoppe?
Yeah, of course. Hi, this is Chris Demm from the Two Guys Named Chris show, and you're listening to Hoppe Hour with Ryan Hoppe.
Thank you, bro. Now, before I let you go, how can people check out your show if they haven't heard it yet?
Well, we have, of course, 92.3 on the FM dial. We're on in 4 different DBC markets: Myrtle Beach, Jacksonville, New Bern, North Carolina, and Savannah, Hilton Head, South Carolina, Georgia, on the dial. You can stream us through rock92.com. We have an app that is, I understand, working better than it used to. I think it's a Rock 92 app. I don't think there's a Two Guys Named Chris app at this moment.
Well, man, it's been a lot of fun having you on a show. It's very surreal because, I've heard your voice for a quarter century since I was being driven around the area, because I would visit during Thanksgiving. So I would be there, and then I went there during the summer a few times. We would drive to Winston-Salem because we didn't really we couldn't really afford to fly. So we would drive 12 hours to go through Indianapolis, Louisville,
Oh my God.
West Virginia. My mom got like 3 speeding tickets in West Virginia. She would just speed so fast, but we always would listen to your show whenever we were in town. And then once like social media began in like 2010, I've been listening since. So Chris, it's been a lot of fun having you on the show.
Hey, listen, and congratulations to you. I know we have talked off air about, meeting at a convention. Would you say 10, 11 years ago?
Yeah, it's crazy.
Credit to you.
Thank you.
Credit to you for building your little empire and keeping, I'm not belittling it, but for building your own empire.
I know that's kind of my plan. You know what I mean? It was crazy when you sent me the email and you said that was a long time ago. I had this weird like thought in my head. I was like, wow, 2014 is considered a long time ago. It was just weird. It's funny.
Believe me, I get it. Yeah.
Well, man, this has been a lot of fun.
Congratulations, man.
I know that really means a lot, man. I appreciate that.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity. It's I appreciate you being a listener when you can, and for being a fan from so far back. And please tell your family we appreciate them tuning in whenever they can.
Well, Chris, it's been a lot of fun having you on the show. Keep up the good work, and maybe I'll see you at a morning show boot camp sometime.
That'd be awesome. Well, cheers to Hoppe Hour.
Thank you, Chris. I appreciate it, bro.
Take care.
All right, bye. Oh, my God. That was freaking crazy. Now, if you're listening to my voice and you want to hear more of my show, go to every single major podcasting platform and search up Hoppe Radio, Hoppe Radio, to listen to Hoppe Hour. I do 2 versions, one where I interview radio people and one where it's a little crazier, or I talk about celebrity news. This has been Hoppe Hour. I am your host, Ryan Hoppe, signing off. Goodbye.
Tick-tock, clocks are juking, playing cruel pranks. Hoppe's hour almost done, feels like robbery in banks. Ryan Hoppe on the mic, dropping wisdom in streams. Syndicated sorrow, now it's time to shatter dreams. Oh, the Hoppe hour is coming to a close. Radio waves fading like a wilted rose. Laughter and joy dissolving in the air, but we keep the rhythm. Oh, life's just so unfair. But the laughter's growing dim. Eardrums mixing Hoppe like fingers without rings. DHX to FM, shoutouts hit the street, but soon the sound will vanish like shadows in the heat. Oh, the Hoppe hour is coming to a close. Radio waves fading like a wilting rose. Laughter and joy dissolving in the air, but we'll keep the rhythm. Oh, life's just so unfair. Phone lines buzzing, but the laughter's growing dim. Eardrums mixing Hoppe like fingers without rings. DHX to FM, shoutouts hit the street, but soon the sound will vanish like shadows in the heat. Oh, the Hoppe hour is coming to a close. Radio waves fading like a wilting rose. Laughter and joy dissolving in the air, but we'll keep the rhythm. Oh, life's just so unfair. Oh, life's just so unfair. Like clockwork to a show. Now it's time to face the silence like a TV on snow. Ryan Hoppe held the mic with humor so divine. The void left in our hearts wider than a canyon line. Empty speakers, silent time, but coming to an end like a roller coaster stopping round the river's bend. Hoppe's jokes and jabs, these our daily grind. Now silence louder than the thoughts we can't rewind. Oh, the Hoppe hour is coming to a close. Radio waves fading like a wilting rose. Laughter and joy dissolving in the air, but we'll keep the rhythm. Oh, life's just so unfair. The Hoppe hour is coming to a close. Radio waves fading like a wilting rose. Laughter and joy dissolving in the air, but we'll keep the rhythm. Oh, life's just so unfair.
Hoppe hour. Hoppe hour.
RyanHoppeRadio.com.
And like that, he's gone.
Whenever we're going outside, all I smell is poop.
I'll kick you in the nuts and we'll call it a day.
Hoppe hour is now over. Hoppe hour is is now over. Game over.
This concludes our broadcast day. Good night, and God bless America.
Doors closing.